Summoner's Rift. Seconds until minions spawn. Minions have spawned. Slain. An enemy has been slain. has been slain. Enemy killing spree. Enemy is unstoppable. Rampage. Your inhibitor has been destroyed. Your turret has been destroyed. An ally has been slain. Summoner's Rift. A summoner has disconnected. 30 seconds until minions spawn. Minions have spawned.
Euro cuck.
Every 100 knows about the Bangladeshi genocide, or like what we did or what they did or whatever. It's just yeah.
That consul in Taka, Kissinger said, doesn't have the strongest nerves. Archer Blood's telegram got thrown in the trash. So as Pakistan was destroying Bangladesh with American weapons, Nixon and Kissinger knew exactly what was going on. And they weren't angry. If anything, they were impressed. The use of power against seeming odds, Kissinger says, pays off. That was partly because of Cold War power politics. After all, Pakistan was an anti-communist partner and Pakistan's neighboring rival, India, seen as a Soviet ally. So Pakistan was an essential outpost for US interests and its actions couldn't be opposed. And Nixon and Kissinger also held really racist views that led them to ignore the killings. What Nixon had to say about Indians in one White House conversation.
The most unattractive women in the world are the Indian women. Most sexless, nut people. I mean, people say, what about the black Africans? The colors, Indians, apathetic.
When one American
That's some classic Americana right there. And people act today like modern reactionaries don't think this way. The only difference between like what Nixon said there and what Trump's like thinks is that Trump doesn't say it. You know what I mean? You think you think like McConnell doesn't think shit like that? Like the only difference here is that they've stopped saying it out loud because they can't get away with it anymore. Outside of that, like I don't think any Reagan was the one who compared black people to monkeys, right? That was Reagan, right? In the White House, not as a governor. Yeah, like that was just in the 80s, you know?
American diplomats suggested cutting off aid to Pakistan to stop the genocide, Nixon put it bluntly. I wouldn't do that to help the Indians. The Indians are no goddamn good. What Indians really need, Nixon said, is a mass famine. Kissinger agreed. He added,
Another one? Wait.
What we need, Nixon said, is a mass famine. Kissinger agreed. He added, they are a scavenging people. So Nixon and Kissinger stepped up aid to Pakistan. They illegally transferred more American weapons into the hands of Pakistan through American allies like Jordan, Iran, and Turkey. The United States even made an implicit threat toward India not to intervene by moving a nuclear aircraft carrier into the Bay of Bengal on the coast of Bangladesh. And as America assisted the genocide, the situation escalated. With so many Bengali refugees flooding across the border, India had to intervene. The Indian government gave its support to pro-independence Bangladeshi rebels fighting the Pakistani army. Pakistan responded by launching an attack on the Indian Air Force, and the situation turned into an all-out war. But with Indian intervention, that war ended in just 2 weeks. Pakistan surrendered and Bangladesh became an independent country.
Damn, anti-imperialist India really stepping up to the bat there. Jesus Christ. I was wondering when India would get involved. Because, like, India is like, literally separates the two of them. India is a far larger country, you know. It's certainly a viable military power, you know.
Yahya Khan resigned in disgrace. Rahman was freed and became the first president of the independent nation of Bangladesh.
The memory of what happened there may already be growing dim in many of us, but what did happen there will never be forgotten by the people of Bangladesh, especially the women.
But in Pakistan, there was never any trial of the war criminals. People who had carried out the genocide got away with it. The generals and politicians who had planned it remained dominant in national life. Even in Bangladesh, many people who had collaborated in the genocide continued to be prominent in public life, becoming businessmen and politicians. And two of the biggest collaborators in the genocide, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, were never tried or held responsible for their role in Bangladesh. They had knowingly facilitated a genocide, had joked about it, had spoken positively of its leaders, and they got away with it. I'm Nashwa Zaman for the Gravel Institute.
Yeah, America bad unironically, actually. You know how, do you ever get the feeling that the walls are closing in on the American empire, and a lot of it is because, unbeknownst to the average American, there are billions of people out there who despise us with every, like, fiber of their being and will never stop despising us because we're directly involved in some horrible shit that happened in their country, you know? Like, that doesn't happen here in America. Like, nobody in America is like, those Bangladeshi... Like, no, that doesn't... It doesn't happen here. We're safe from everything. The closest thing we have is 9/11 and then Pearl Harbor, like, a century ago. You know, like, that's the closest we've got. Yeah. We're building up quite the grudge list. Yeah. Wacky stuff. Bosh, I thought democracies didn't do genocide. What? Democracies absolutely do genocides. Who said they haven't? Oh, they have the Chud tag. Oh, okay. I don't know. Could you go over this article Xander Hall went over? It's crazy. No, we have 7 minutes. We have 7 minutes till the hearings. I'll go and C-SPAN in just a second. I'm joking. Oh, I can't tell. SG, I can't tell. You've got the Chud tag. I can't tell.
Searched by the FBI this morning. This is a very serious case. His attorney told the Washington Post just a couple hours ago that Kelly currently has every intention of continuing his campaign in earnest. Libby?
Thanks so much, Mary Beth Albright. James Homan, we're getting images here of this ever-growing crowd in the Cannon House office building. I just caught a glimpse of Rhonda on the camera there, sitting at a table with other reporters as they prepare to cover tonight. As Mary Beth is talking about the criminal charges, how important is it that the committee reference that, but make the point that it doesn't end there, right? That it doesn't end with those individuals and their personal responsibility.
Yeah, and ultimately, Mary Beth did a great job of laying out the charges that will face, the foot soldiers of this insurrection. But this committee, there's a different standard of public opinion and of the politics. What's crazy is the guy that she was just talking about, who's running for governor in Michigan. I talked to a Democratic strategist in Michigan a few minutes before we went on the air, and he was saying, I think this is actually going to help him in the crowded Republican primary. Doug Mastriano, the Republican nominee for governor in Pennsylvania, used campaign funds from his state Senate race to bus people down to the Capitol, walked from the Ellipse to right outside the Capitol. He's cooperating with the January 6th committee, according to his lawyer.
Dominating presence.
So this committee's job is less about the people who breached the Capitol and more about, as Phil Bump was saying a little bit ago, the people who were conspiring behind the scenes to get them to break into the Capitol, if that is in fact what happened.
Let's go to White House Bureau Chief Ashley Parker and get her into the conversation before we go live to cover this hearing. Ashley, the big question, of course, on many people's minds is the responsibility of former President Trump and the people around him. What will you be listening for as the committee tries to build its case?
Well, I'll be looking for sort of all of the details that, frankly, we in our reporting, which I should say felt quite rigorous, but were unable to fill in. As you know, the Washington Post did this huge multimedia digital print project known as The Attack, where we sort of chronicled the before, during, and after of January 6th. And we had a ton of scoops, a ton of reporting. But we also, when we put this in the project, we had some holes and we had some questions we still wanted answered because we were mere reporters and we didn't have subpoena power and we didn't have the ability to get some of those documents and some of those text messages and some of the testimony that this committee can get. So, for me, for as much as we found out, there was still some sort of just unknowable areas of exactly what former President Trump was doing on January 6th, especially once he became aware of what was going on in the Capitol. And we know that he was watching on television. We know that he initially was sort of enjoying it and kind of felt buoyed by how fervent he viewed his supporters. We know people were racing in and out of the Oval and calling close to him and trying to get him to put out a video or put out a statement or put out a tweet. But we don't know, every word he uttered. And so I'm very curious to see if what the committee was able to uncover that we weren't.
There's also the question, Ashley, of democracy going forward, right? And part of the project that you were involved with is looking at the aftermath. What does the committee hope to achieve here, and what is the exploration they need to do about what happens next, how election integrity is preserved in the future?
This is interesting because this is one of the sort of internal, and we've heard it's been very respectful and collegial, but debates within the committee of sort of how far they should go in trying to make in their final report recommendations about, what they think needs to happen to kind of protect democracy. And there's some disagreement in part between Liz Cheney on the committee and some of the Democrats over that.
So, Ashley, there's also
look
the
at YouTube
question
chat. I'm
of
looking.
everything leading up to January 6th and what President Trump was doing to try to subvert the will of the American people. How are you going to be listening for that in this process?
Well, again, one thing when I was sort of reporting and when we conceived about this and we're trying to understand it, it very much felt in the run-up that there was this moment where there were it was a train and there were kind of two tracks, and there's this moment where it diverges and it goes to this track where former President Trump is, pitching the big lie, the false and absolutely baseless claim that the election was somehow stolen or rigged, and from that flows this idea that if this election was stolen, then Trump and his allies need to take steps to rightfully reclaim the election for himself. And you had, as it was described to us, a couple of key dates on the calendar where they thought they could make a difference, including, when the electors gathered. And of course, at each step, it kept on getting deferred. And Trump and his allies would say, well, we didn't succeed on election night, so, we're kicking it down the road. And then we didn't succeed when all the news organizations, counted the votes and called it for Biden. So now we're taking it to December 14th. And the last and final date was January 6th, where, of course, we know what happened. And so I will sort of be looking for also that moment where, the train kind of got out of control and went on one track.
Ashley Parker, White House Bureau Chief, thank you so much. James Homan, we are looking at this packed hearing room where everything will begin in just a few moments. We've seen quite a few of the officers there who were defending the Capitol that day, who were injured. I saw Officer Harry Dunn, also Officer Gunnell, who Rhonda's been talking with, former Officer Fanone. Officer Dunn has a T-shirt on that has the definition of insurrection on it, James.
Yeah, it really is amazing.
Powerful.
The
Powerful
Democrats
stuff.
have really struggled since 2020 with target, criticism of some were saying defund the police or what have you. These law enforcement sources, these officials, these officers, frontline officers, are such compelling witnesses because they underscore that this was not some kind of victimless crime. There, it wasn't just democracy that was under attack that day. It was also these officers of the law.
Men and women, Americans. Let's review, in case people are just tuning in. We will hear from two live witnesses today. Caroline Edwards, a Capitol police officer, one of the first people, if not the first officer injured in the attack on the Capitol. We'll also hear from Nick Husted, who's a filmmaker who was embedded with the Proud Boys. James, what will we be listening for from him?
With Nick Husted, he's really going to show that this was not spontaneous, that this was not just a bunch of angry insurrectionists or people who were caught up in a mob, but that there was
gifting
planning and
YouTube
coordination,
Thanks,
that there was a meeting in a parking garage the night before the insurrection to talk through the plan where someone mentions the Capitol. He is going to show his raw tape that will take us inside the deliberation.
Yeah, raw. Give it raw.
We also anticipate getting a sense tonight, James, of what exactly the committee will be doing in the coming weeks. We know there will be 6 hearings this month. They could add on more, but we expect them to lay out for us tonight the timeline as well as the plan, how the hearings will drill down and focus on various elements of this. You see there the chair, Ben Thompson, also the vice chair, Liz Cheney. They are going to be presenting and asking questions tonight. And the other members, 7 members of the committee, 2 Republicans, 7 Democrats. This is live coverage from the Washington Post. Stay with us tonight and throughout this month as we cover these primetime hearings as well as daytime hearings live from Capitol Hill.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during tonight's hearing. Thanks to everyone watching tonight for sharing part of your evening to learn the facts and causes of the events leading up to and including the violent attack on January 6, 2021. Our democracy, electoral system, and country. I'm Benny Thompson, chairman of the January 6, 2021 committee. I was born, raised, and still live in Bolton, Mississippi, a town with a population of 521, which is midway between Jackson and Vicksburg, Mississippi, and the Mississippi River. I'm from the part of the country where people justified the actions of slavery, Ku Klux Klan, and lynching. I'm reminded of that dark history as I hear voices today try and justify the actions of the insurrectionists on January 6th.
Okay, that seems like a little bit of a stretch, my dude.
Over the next few weeks, hopefully you will get to know the other members, my colleagues up here, and me. We represent a diversity of communities from all over the United States, rural areas and cities, East Coast, West Coast, and the Heartland, all of us have one thing in common. We swore the same oath. That same oath that all members of Congress take upon taking office and afterwards every 2 years if they are reelected. We swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The words of the current oath taken by all of us that nearly every United States government employee takes have their roots in the Civil War. Throughout our history, the United States has fought against foreign enemies to preserve our democracy, electoral system, and country. When the United States Capitol was stormed and burned in 1814, foreign enemies were responsible. Afterward, in 1862, when American citizens had taken up arms against this country, Congress adopted a new oath to help make sure no person who had supported the rebellion hold a position of public trust. Therefore, Congresspersons and United States federal government employees were required for the first time to swear an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath was put to test on January 6, 2021. Police officers who held the line that day honored their oath. Many came out of that day bloody and broken. They still bear those wounds, visible and invisible. They did their duty. They repelled the mob, ended the occupation of the Capitol. They defended the Constitution against domestic enemies so that Congress could return, uphold our own oath, and count your votes to ensure the transfer of power, just as we've done for hundreds of years. But unlike in 1814, it was domestic enemies of the Constitution who stormed the Capitol and occupied the Capitol, who sought to thwart the will of the people to stop the transfer of power. And so they did, so at the encouragement of the President of the United States. The President of the United States trying to stop the transfer of power, a precedent that had stood for 220 years, even as our democracy had faced its most difficult test. Thinking back again to the Civil War in the summer of 1864, the President of the United States believed we would be doomed to his bid for re-election. He believed his opponent, General George McClellan, would wave the white flag when it came to preserving the Union. Even with that grim fate hanging in the balance, President Lincoln was ready to accept the will of the voters, come what may. He made a quiet plea. He wrote down the words, "This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be reelected. Then it will be my duty to so cooperate with the president-elect. It will be my duty." Lincoln sealed that memo and asked his cabinet secretaries to sign it sight unseen. He asked them to make the same commitment he did, to accept defeat, if indeed defeat was the will of the people, to uphold the rule of law, to do what every president who came before him did, and what every president who followed him would do, until Donald Trump. Donald Trump lost the presidential election in 2020. The American people voted him out of office. It was not because of a rigged system. It was not because of voter fraud. Don't believe me? Hear what his former Attorney General had to say about it. I warn those who watching that this contains strong language.
No, just what I've been through. I had 3 discussions with the president that I can recall. One was on November 23rd, one was on December 1st, and one was on December 14th. And I've been through sort of the give and take of those discussions. And in that context, I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And
wait, I've never heard this call before. Have I? I don't think I have.
One of the reasons that led to me deciding to leave when I did. I observed.
Oh, this isn't even a call. It's a.
First,
oh, I've never listened to this before.
You can't live in a world where the incumbent administration stays in power based on its view, unsupported by specific evidence, that there was fraud in the election.
Bill Barr, on Election Day 2020, he was the Attorney General of the United States, the top law enforcement official in the country, telling the president exactly what he thought about claims of a stolen election.
Oh shit, we might get some new memes tonight, boys.
To challenge the results. He was within his rights to seek those judgments. In the United States, law-abiding citizens have those tools for pursuing justice. He lost in the courts, just as he did at the ballot box. And in this country, that's the end of the line. But for Donald Trump, that was only the beginning of what became a sprawling, multi-step conspiracy aimed at overturning the presidential election, aimed at throwing out the votes of millions of Americans, your votes, your voice in our democracy, and replacing the will.
I just want to say, one of the most upvoted fucking memes that I saw upvoted on, I think the Donald might have still been a subreddit, or it might have been a conservative subreddit, and on Twitter, one of the most upvoted memes that I saw was after Trump was elected, Democrats fucking spent the next 2 weeks crying and moaning about it. And you know what's gonna happen if Donald Trump loses the election? You know what conservatives are gonna do the next day? They're gonna go to work. That's what everybody said. You remember that meme? You know what conservatives are gonna do if Donald Trump loses? They're gonna go to sleep, wake up, and go to work. That's what conservatives do. And lo and behold, they spent the next however long it's been since then complaining that the election has been stolen, that it was all rigged, that blah, blah, blah. Good job, guys.
Of the American people, with his will to remain in power after his term ended. Donald Trump was at the center of this conspiracy. And ultimately, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, spurred a mob of domestic enemies of the Constitution to march down the Capitol and subvert American democracy. Any legal jargon you hear about seditious conspiracy, obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States boils down to this. January 6th was the culmination of an attempted coup. A brazen attempt, as one rioter put it shortly after January 6th, to overthrow the government. The violence was no accident. It represents Senator Trump's last stand, most desperate chance to halt the transfer of power. Now, you may hear those words and think, this is just another political attack on Donald Trump by people who don't like him. That's not the case. My colleagues and I all wanted an outside independent commission to investigate January 6th, similar to what we had after 9/11. But after first agreeing to the idea, Donald Trump's allies in Congress put a stop to it. Apparently, they don't want January 6th investigated at all. And in the last 17 months, many of those same people have tried to whitewash what happened on January 6th, to rewrite history, call it a tourist visit, label it legitimate political discourse. Donald Trump and his followers have adopted the words of the songwriter, "Do you believe me or your lying eyes?" We can't sweep what happened under the rug. The American people deserve answers. So I come before you this evening, not as a Democrat, but as an American who swore an oath to defend the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't protect just Democrats or just Republicans. It protects all of us, we the people. And this scheme was an attempt to undermine the will of the people. So tonight, and over the next few weeks, we're going to remind you of the reality of what happened that day. But our work must do much more than just look backwards. Because of our democracy remains in danger, the conspiracy to thwart the will of the people is not over. There are those in this audience who thirst for power but have no love or respect for what makes America great. Devotion to the Constitution, allegiance to the rule of law, our shared journey to build a more perfect union. January 6th and the lies that led to insurrection have put 2.5 centuries of constitutional democracy at risk. The world is watching what we do here. America has long been expected to be a shining city on the hill, a beacon of hope and freedom, a model for others when we are at our best. How can we play that role when our house is in such disorder? We must confront the truth with candor, resolve, and determination. We need to show that we are worthy of the gifts that are the birthright of every American. That begins here, and it begins now, with a true accounting of what happened and what led to the attack on our Constitution and our democracy. In this moment, when the dangers of our Constitution and our democracy loom large, nothing could be more important. Working alongside the public servants on this dais has been one of the greatest honors of my time in Congress. It's been a particular privilege to count as a partner in this effort and to count as a friend the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney. She's a patriot, a public servant of profound courage, of devotion to her oath and the Constitution. It's my pleasure to recognize Ms. Cheney for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me echo
We're gonna have Vosh here.
those
I didn't
words
write
about
one.
the importance of bipartisanship and what a tremendous honor it is to work on this committee. Mr. Chairman, at 6:01 p.m. on January 6th, after he spent hours watching a violent mob besiege, attack, and invade our Capitol, Donald Trump tweeted that he did not condemn the attack. Instead, he justified it. These are the things and events that happen, he said, when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who've been badly and unfairly treated for so long. As you will see in the hearings to come, President Trump believed his supporters at the Capitol, and I quote, "were doing what they should be doing." This is what he told his staff as they pleaded with him to call off the mob, to instruct his supporters to leave. Over a series of hearings in the coming weeks, you will hear testimony, live and on video, from more than half a dozen former White House staff in the Trump administration, all of whom were in the West Wing of the White House on January 6th. You will hear testimony that, quote, "the president did not really want to put anything out," calling off the riot, or asking his supporters to leave. You will hear that President Trump was yelling and, quote, "really angry at advisors who told him he needed to be doing something more." And aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, "maybe our supporters have the right idea." Mike Pence, quote, "deserves it."
Yikes.
You will hear evidence that President Trump refused for hours to do what his staff, his family, and many of his other advisors begged him to do. Immediately instruct his supporters to stand down and evacuate the Capitol. Tonight, you will see never-before-seen footage of the brutal attack on our Capitol. An attack that unfolded while a few blocks away, President Trump sat watching television in the dining room next to the Oval Office. You will hear audio from the brave police officers battling for their lives and ours, fighting to defend our democracy against a violent mob Donald Trump refused to call off. Tonight and in the weeks to come, you will see evidence of what motivated this violence.
Don't worry, guys. If you're in your chat, I know I got a lot of conservative stuff. Just you guys can cope with yourself and say it was all deep fake, okay? I'm sure none of it is real. Russia and Hillary themselves have personally documented
Directly from those who participated in this attack. You will see video of them explaining what caused them to do it. You will see their posts on social media. We will show you what they have said in federal court. On this point, there is no room for debate. Those who invaded our Capitol and battled law enforcement for hours were motivated by what President Trump had told them, that the election was stolen and that he was the rightful president. President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. You will also hear about plots to commit seditious conspiracy on January 6th, a crime defined in our laws as conspiring to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to oppose by force the authority thereof. Multiple members of two groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, have been charged with this crime for their involvement in the events leading up
What
to
is the
and on January 6th.
max punishment for sedition?
have
Can you
pled
get like
guilty.
firing squatted for that?
The attack on our Capitol was not a spontaneous riot. Intelligence available before January 6th identified plans to, quote, invade the Capitol, occupy the Capitol, and take other steps to halt Congress's count
That
of
would be
electoral
wild.
votes that day.
Oh, 20 years in prison. Oh, no.
In our hearings to come, we will identify elements of those plans, and we will show specifically how a group of Proud Boys led a mob into the Capitol building on January 6th. Tonight, I am going to describe for you some of what our committee has learned and highlight initial findings you will see this month in our hearings. As you hear this, all Americans should keep in mind this fact. On the morning of January 6th, President Donald Trump's intention was to remain President of the United States, despite the lawful outcome of the 2020 election and in violation of his constitutional obligation to relinquish power. Over multiple months, Donald Trump oversaw and coordinated a sophisticated 7-part plan to overturn the presidential election and prevent the transfer of presidential power. In our hearings, you will see evidence of each element of this plan.
Donald
In
Trump
our second
coordinating
hearing,
it?
you will see that Donald Trump and his advisors knew that he had in fact lost the election. But despite this, President Trump engaged in a massive effort to spread false and fraudulent information to convince
Those are
huge
really
portions
big
of the
claims.
US population
I hope that we get some
fraud
good evidence
had
from
stolen
this.
the election from him. This was not true. Jason Miller was a senior Trump campaign spokesman. In this clip,
Trump hasn't
Miller
been charged
describes
with
a
anything,
call
right, related
between
to
the
this?
Trump campaign's internal data expert and President Trump a few days after the 2020 election.
I was in the Oval Office.
Do you think this could end with charges for him?
And at some point in the conversation, Matt Oskowski, who was the lead data person, was brought on. And I remember he delivered to the president pretty blunt terms that he was going to lose.
And that was based, Mr. Miller, on Matt and the data team's assessment of the sort of county by county, state by state results.
Oh, they
as
can't charge, but
reported.
they can recommend charges to the DOJ?
Alex Cannon was one of President Trump's campaign lawyers. He previously worked for the Trump Organization. One of his responsibilities was to assess allegations of election fraud in November 2020. Here is one sample of his testimony discussing what he told White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
I remember a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states.
Real wins. When was that conversation?
Probably in November, mid to late November. I think it was before my child was born.
And what was Mr. Meadows' reaction to that information?
I believe the words he used were, so there's no there there.
There's no there. The Trump campaign's general counsel, Matt Morgan, gave similar testimony. He explained that all of the fraud allegations and the campaign's other election arguments taken together and viewed in the best possible light for President Trump but still not change the outcome of the election. President Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr also told Donald Trump his election claims were wrong.
Repeatedly told the president in no uncertain terms that I did not see evidence of fraud. And
Barr was like the
that
number
would
one
have
Trump.
outcome of the election. And frankly, a year and a half later, I haven't seen anything to change my mind on that.
Attorney General Barr also told President Trump that his allegations about Dominion voting machines were groundless.
He even posted on the White House official page relating to the FBI
I
and his
saw
investigation
absolutely zero basis for the allegations
of those machines.
But they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
But President Trump persisted, repeating the false Dominion allegations in public at least a dozen more times, even after his Attorney General told him they were, quote, complete nonsense. And after Barr's resignation on December 23rd, the acting Attorney General who replaced him, Jeff Rosen, and the acting deputy, Richard Donahue, told President Trump over and over again that the evidence did not support allegations he was making in public. Many of President Trump's White House staff also recognized that the evidence did not support the claims President Trump was making. This is the president's daughter commenting on Bill Barr's statement that the department found no fraud sufficient to overturn the election.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
As you will hear on Monday, the president had every right to litigate his campaign claims, but he ultimately lost more than 60 cases in state and federal courts. The president's claims in the election cases were so frivolous and unsupported that the president's lead lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, not only lost the lawsuits, his license to practice law was suspended. Here's what the court said of Mr. Giuliani.
Rip.
Giuliani communicated demonstrably false and misleading statements to courts, lawmakers, and the public
And the
at
media,
large
yeah.
in his capacity as lawyer for former President Donald J. Trump and the Trump campaign in connection with Trump's failed effort at re-election in 2020. As you will see in great detail in our hearings, President Trump ignored the rulings of our nation's courts. He ignored his own campaign leadership, his White House staff, many Republican state officials. He ignored the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump invested millions of dollars of campaign funds purposely spreading false information, running ads he knew were false, and convincing millions of Americans that the election was corrupt and that he was the true president. As you will see, this misinformation campaign provoked the violence on January 6th. In our third hearing, you will see that President Trump corruptly planned to replace the Attorney General of the United States so the U.S. Justice Department would spread his false stolen election claims. In the days before January 6th, President Trump told his top Justice Department officials, quote, "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." Senior Justice Department officials, men he had appointed, told him they could not do that because it was not true. So President Trump decided to replace them. He offered Jeff Clark, an environmental lawyer at the Justice Department, the job of acting Attorney General. President Trump wanted
These
Mr.
are new
Clark
claims,
to
I
take
believe.
a
I've
number
never
of
heard these
steps,
before, unless I missed
including
them.
sending this letter to Georgia and 5 other states, saying the U.S. Department of Justice had, quote, identified significant...
Okay, hold on. Yeah, new lore. Okay, so I could be wrong. Maybe I've missed stuff or I haven't kept up on things, but up to this point, our understanding is that Trump has kind of called publicly, like he's made statements that maybe, is he really saying the election was stolen? I don't know. And then also we've heard that 5% of people that were at the January 6th riots, that 5% of them maybe were involved in some type of coordination, right? Which is a pretty big deal. Damn, there's coordinated things. My understanding is that up until this point, I don't think Donald Trump has ever been directly implicated in any of this ever. I've never even heard that. That's like basically conspiracy theory. So if we're going to hear them substantiate these claims, these are like brand new things that have come out as a result of their investigations that haven't been leaked or mentioned ever. The most I've ever heard is like maybe Trump knew about something or allowed something. But this idea that Trump was giving commands to override the election to officials and stuff, I don't believe that's ever been released publicly before. So this is kind of a big deal. Yeah.
Significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election. This letter is a lie. The Department of Justice had in fact repeatedly told President Trump exactly the opposite, that they had investigated his stolen election.
Hold on. Destiny, how big of a deal is this committee? Well, if they can substantiate what they're saying, without trying to pull a Vosh and being overreacting, this would probably be like one of the most important things that's ever like had a committee convened on it, probably in American history. If it's actually the case that they can directly implicate Trump with either the groups that were there at January 6th, that would be unbelievable. Or that he was trying to coordinate some effort between lawmakers, public officials, and appointed people to overturn the election, knowing that the election results were valid, that would be unbelievable. Will he face criminal charges? It seems weird that he wouldn't if that was the case. If that was the case. But we'll see what they substantiate here, right? It could be a big nothing burger because Democrats are whatever. Who knows?
Allegations and found no credible fraud that could impact the outcome of the election. This letter and others like it would have urged multiple states to withdraw their official and lawful electoral votes for Biden. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue described Jeff Clark's letter this way, quote, "This would be a grave step for the department to take and could have tremendous constitutional, political, and social ramifications for this country." The committee agrees with Mr. Donahue's assessment. Had Clark assumed the role of Attorney General in the days before January 6th and issued these letters, the ramifications could indeed have been grave. Mr. Donahue also said this about Clark's plan.
And I recall toward the end saying, what you're proposing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of the presidential election.
In our hearings, you will hear firsthand how the senior leadership of the Department of Justice threatened to resign, how the White House counsel threatened to resign, and how they confronted Donald Trump and Jeff Clark in the Oval Office. The men involved, including Acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen and Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, were appointed by President Trump. These men honored their oaths of office, they did their duty, and you will hear from them in our hearings. By contrast, Jeff Clark has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and refused to testify. Representative Scott Perry, who is also involved in trying to get Clark appointed as Attorney General, has refused to testify here. As you will see, Representative Perry contacted the White House in the weeks after January 6th to seek a presidential pardon. Multiple other Republican congressmen also sought presidential pardons for their roles in attempting to overturn the 2020 election. In our fourth hearing, we will focus on President Trump's efforts to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to refuse to count electoral votes on January 6th. Vice President Pence has spoken publicly about this.
President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
What President Trump demanded that Mike Pence do wasn't just wrong. It was illegal and it was unconstitutional. You will hear this in great detail from the Vice President's former general counsel. Witnesses in these hearings will explain how the former Vice President and his staff informed President Trump over and over again that what he was pressuring Mike Pence to do was illegal. As you will hear, President Trump engaged in a relentless effort to pressure Pence, both in private and in public. You will see the evidence of that pressure from multiple witnesses, live and on video. Vice President Pence demonstrated his loyalty to Donald Trump consistently over 4 years, but he knew that he had a higher duty to the United States Constitution. This is testimony from the Vice President's Chief of Staff.
So I think the Vice President was proud of his 4 years of service, and he felt like much had been accomplished in those 4 years. And I think he was proud to have stood beside the President.
Are these hearings only to indict Trump or other people? Well, I could be wrong, but I think initially my understanding was that this was just going to be about like co-conspirators, or not co-conspirators even. This was just going to be about like the people who were at the riots in January 6th. That's what this was supposed to be about. But now it sounds like this is actually going to be way more severe, that this is going to focus on establishing that Donald Trump was actually the one, like, explicitly planning a lot of this stuff. I don't know if they're going to establish, like, the actual rioters themselves, but at the very least, like, trying to get members of his cabinet or people in the White House or the lawmakers on board with it.
For all that had been done. But I think he ultimately knew that his fidelity to the Constitution was his first and foremost oath. And that's what he articulated publicly, and I think that that's what he felt.
His fidelity to the Constitution was more important than his fidelity to President Trump and his
The oath he took.
Yes.
You'll also hear about a lawyer named John Eastman. Mr.
People are saying they've been
is
saying for
deeply
weeks
involved
Trump,
in
they have
President
evidence of Trump as
Trump's
well.
plans.
Okay, maybe.
You'll hear from former Fourth Circuit federal judge Michael Ludig, a highly respected leading conservative judge. John Eastman clerked for Judge Ludig. Judge Ludig provided counsel to the vice president's team in the days before January 6th. The judge will explain how Eastman, quote, was wrong at every turn. And you will see the email exchanges between Eastman and the vice president's counsel as the violent attack on Congress was underway. Mr. Jacob said this to Mr. Eastman: "Thanks to your bullshit, we are under siege." You will also see evidence that John
What
Eastman
would
did not...
substantive evidence look like for these claims? Well, right now we're getting, assuming that they can substantiate what they're saying, we're getting literally direct testimony, which is arguably like one of the strongest forms of evidence. Like, we're getting people saying that, like, Trump told me to do this, or that, like, yeah, or people that saw Trump say these things. So we're getting direct, we're getting actual direct testimony to it.
actually believe the legal position he was taking. In fact, a month before the 2020 election, Eastman took exactly the opposite view on the same legal issues. In the course of the Select Committee's work to obtain information from Mr. Eastman, we have had occasion to present evidence to a federal judge. The judge evaluated the facts, and he...
God feel when the January 6th committee finishes their manifesto on Trump before I finish my manifesto. RIP.
Reached the conclusion that President Trump's efforts to pressure Vice President Pence to act illegally by refusing to count electoral votes likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes. And the judge also said this: if Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan had worked, it would have permanently ended the peaceful transition of power, undermining American democracy and the Constitution. If the country does not commit to investigating and pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6th will repeat itself. Every American should read what this federal judge has written. The same judge, Judge Carter, issued another decision on Tuesday night, just this week, indicating that John Eastman and other Trump lawyers knew that their legal arguments had no real chance of success in court, but they relied on those arguments anyway to try to, quote, overturn a Democratic election. And you will hear that while Congress was under attack on January 6th and the hours following the violence, the Trump legal team in the Willard Hotel War Room continued to work to halt the count of electoral votes. In our 5th hearing, you will see evidence that President Trump corruptly pressured state legislators and election officials to change election results. You will hear additional details about President Trump's call to Georgia officials, urging them to, quote, find 11,780 votes that did not exist, and his efforts to get states to rescind certified electoral slates without factual basis and contrary to law. You will hear new details about the Trump campaign and other Trump associates' efforts to instruct Republican officials in multiple states to create intentionally false electoral slates and transmit those slates to Congress, to the Vice President, and the National Archives, falsely certifying that Trump won states he actually lost. In our final 2 June hearings, you will hear how President Trump summoned a violent mob and directed them illegally to march on the United States Capitol. While the violence was underway, President Trump failed to take immediate action to stop the violence and instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol. As we present these initial findings, keep 2 points in mind. First, our investigation is still ongoing, so what we make public here will not be the complete set of information we will ultimately disclose. And second, the Department of Justice is currently working with cooperating witnesses and has disclosed to date only some of the information it has identified from encrypted communications and other sources. On December 18th, 2020, a group, including General Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others, visited the White House. They stayed late into the evening. We know that the group discussed a number of dramatic steps, including having the military seize voting machines and potentially rerun elections. You will also hear that President Trump met with that group alone for a period of time before White House lawyers and other staff discovered the group was there and rushed to intervene. A little more than an hour after Ms. Powell, Mr. Giuliani, General Flynn, and the others finally left the White House, President Trump sent the tweet on the screen now, telling people to come to Washington on January 6th. Be there, he instructed them. Will be wild. As you will see, this was a pivotal moment. This tweet initiated a chain of events. The tweet led to the planning for what occurred on January 6th, including by the Proud Boys, who ultimately led the invasion of the Capitol and the violence on that day. The indictment of a group of Proud Boys alleges that they planned, quote, to oppose by force the authority of the government of the United States. And according to the Department of Justice, on January 6, 2021, the defendants directed, mobilized, and led members of the crowd onto the Capitol grounds and into the Capitol, leading to the dismantling of metal barricades, the destruction of property, the breaching of the Capitol building, and the assaults on law enforcement. Although certain former Trump officials have argued that they did not anticipate violence on January 6th, the evidence suggests otherwise. As you will see in our hearings, the White House was receiving specific reports in the days leading up to January 6th, including during President Trump's Ellipse rally, indicating that elements in the crowd were preparing for violence at the Capitol. And on the evening of January 5th, the president's close advisor, Steve Bannon, said this on his podcast.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Just understand this. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
As part of our investigation, we will present information about what the White House and other intelligence agencies knew and why the Capitol was not better prepared. But we will not lose sight of the fact that the Capitol Police did not cause the crowd to attack. And we will not blame the violence that day, violence provoked by Donald Trump, on the officers who bravely defended all of us. In our final hearing, you will hear a moment-by-moment account of the hours-long attack from more than half a dozen White House staff, both live in the hearing room and via videotaped testimony. There's no doubt that President Trump was well aware of the violence as it developed. White House staff urged President Trump to intervene and call off the mob. Here is a document written while the attack was underway by a member of the White House staff advising what the president needed to say. Quote, anyone who entered the Capitol without proper authority should leave immediately. This is exactly what his supporters on Capitol Hill and nationwide were urging the president to do. He would not. You will hear that leaders on Capitol Hill begged the president for help, including Republican leader McCarthy, who was, quote, scared, and called multiple members of President Trump's family after he could not persuade the president himself. Not only did President Trump refuse to tell the mob to leave the Capitol, he placed no call to any element of the United States government to instruct that the Capitol be defended. He did not call his Secretary of Defense on January 6th. He did not talk to his Attorney General. He did not talk to the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump gave no order to deploy the National Guard that day, and he made no effort to work with the Department of Justice to coordinate and deploy law enforcement assets. But Vice President Pence did each of those things. For example, here is what General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff,
pointed it out.
testified
Isn't
to this
it
committee.
the legitimate role of the news media to add a little bit of perspective? Maybe you don't edit.
2 or 3 calls with Vice President.
Our self-centered leaders wanted to
And he
make January 6th all about them. This is so apparently Fox News has said they're not going to cover the January 6th committee. They're just gonna have Tucker Carlson and this guy on. I was chatting for a while about it. Jesus.
For example, here is what General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified to this committee.
There were 2 or 3 calls with Vice President Pence. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders. There was no question about that. And he was, and I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere. But he was very animated, very direct, very firm. And to Secretary Miller, get the military down here, get the Guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
By contrast, here is General Milley's description of his conversation with President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, on January 6th.
He said, we have to kill the narrative that the Vice President is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that, that the President is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or what's that thing. I immediately interpreted that as politics, politics, politics. Red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly.
And you will hear from witnesses how the day played out inside the White House, how multiple White House staff resigned in disgust, and how President Trump would not ask his supporters to leave the Capitol. It was only after multiple hours of violence that President Trump finally released a video instructing the riotous mob to leave. And as he did so, he said to them, quote, "We love you, and you're very special." You will also hear that in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, members of the president's family, White House staff, and others tried to step in to stabilize the situation, quote, to land the plane before the presidential transition on January 20th. You will hear about members of the Trump cabinet discussing the possibility of invoking the 25th Amendment and replacing the President of the United States.
Jesus Christ.
Multiple members of President Trump's own cabinet resigned immediately after January 6th. One member of the cabinet suggested that the remaining cabinet officers needed to take a more active role in running the White House and the administration.
So the people have talked a little bit about the 25th, but basically it's this idea that somehow you could prove that Trump was so mentally incompetent that Pence needed to step up and serve as president.
Administration. But most emblematic of those days is this exchange of texts between Sean Hannity and former President Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. Sean Hannity wrote in part,
I think
"Key now, no more crazy people, no more stolen election talk. Yes, impeachment and 25th Amendment are real. Many people will quit."
Oh, I don't know if these have been leaked
Ms.
yet, but-
McEnany responded in part, "Love that. That's the playbook." The White House staff knew that President Trump was willing to entertain and use conspiracy theories to achieve his ends. They knew the president needed to be cut off from all of those who had encouraged him. They knew that President Donald Trump was too dangerous to be left alone.
Keep in mind, everything that this is about, this guy is likely to probably be president in 2 years. That's the road we're on right now, but.
At least until he left office on January 20th. These are important facts for Congress and the American people to understand fully. When a president fails to take the steps necessary to preserve our union, or worse, causes a constitutional crisis, we're at a moment of maximum danger for our republic. Some in the White House took responsible steps to try to prevent January 6th. Others egged the president on. Others, who could have acted, refused to do so. In this case, the White House counsel was so concerned about potentially lawless activity that he threatened to resign multiple times. That is exceedingly rare and exceedingly serious. It requires immediate attention, especially when the entire team threatens to resign. However, in the Trump White House, it was not exceedingly rare, and it was not treated seriously. This is a clip of Jared Kushner addressing multiple threats by White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his team of lawyers to resign in the weeks before January 6th. Jared, are you aware of instances where Pat Cipollone threatened to resign?
I kind of, like I said, my interest at that time was on trying to get as many pardons done. And I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, oh, we're going to resign.
Why do you think Trump will be president? I think a Republican is going to win next election cycle, and I don't see anybody yet that the Republicans can run besides Trump. Maybe DeSantis, but the Republican base is still squarely supporting Donald Trump. So who knows? We'll see.
We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens. So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
People in chat are saying 100% DeSantis, but the problem is think about it this way. Would Trump be happy if DeSantis ran, or would Trump run anyway? Because I don't think Trump has no mind for politics, right? Trump is here for ego. Trump only wants to be president. He doesn't give a fuck about the Republican Party or the Republic or, the country. He doesn't care about that, right? So it seems like it seems like Trump is probably going to run, given the opportunity to. And if there's infighting, then the Republican Party has fucked itself. I think that DeSantis would just step back. I don't think he'll run against Trump. So
there's a reason why people serving in our government take an oath to the Constitution. As our founding fathers recognized, democracy is fragile. People in positions of public trust are duty-bound to defend it, to step forward when action is required. In our country, we don't swear an oath to an individual or a political party. We take our oath to defend the United States Constitution. And that oath must mean something. Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain. Finally, I ask all of our fellow Americans, as you watch our hearings over the coming weeks, please remember what's at stake. Remember the men and women who have fought and died so that we can live under the rule of law, not the rule of men. I ask you to think of the scene in our Capitol Rotunda on the night of January 6th. There, in a sacred space in our constitutional republic, the place where our presidents lie in state, watched over by statues of Washington and Jefferson, Lincoln and Grant, Eisenhower, Ford, and Reagan. Against every wall that night encircling the room, there were SWAT teams, men and women in tactical gear with long guns, deployed inside our Capitol building. There in the rotunda, these brave men and women rested beneath paintings, depicting the earliest scenes of our republic, including one painted in 1824, depicting George Washington resigning his commission, voluntarily relinquishing power, handing control of the Continental Army back to Congress. With this noble act, Washington set the indispensable example of the peaceful transfer of power, what President Reagan called nothing less than a miracle. The sacred obligation to defend this peaceful transfer of power has been honored by every American president, except one. As Americans, we all have a duty to ensure that what happened on January 6th never happens again, to set aside partisan battles, to stand together to perpetuate and preserve our great republic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As we provide answers to American people about January 6th, it's important that we remember exactly what took place. That this was no tourist visit to the Capitol. Most of the footage we are about to play has never been seen. The Select Committee obtained it as a part of our investigation. This isn't easy to watch. I want to warn everyone that this video includes violence and strong language. Without objection, I include in the record video presentation of the violence of January 6th.
Proud of your boy! Proud of your boy! Proud of your boy!
Yeah, just for awareness, be advised, there's probably about 300 Proud Boys. They're marching eastbound in this 400 block of kind of Independence, actually on the mall towards the United States Capitol.
I am not allowed to say what's going to happen today because everyone's just going to have to watch for themselves. But it's going to happen. Something's going to happen.
Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! We are on your side. Don't make us go against you. Understand the side. Pick a side. These are our streets.
$20 a picture.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify. And we become president, and you are the happiest people. Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
Cruiser 50, it does look like we're going to have an ad hoc march stepping off here. There's a crowd surge heading east.
We love Trump! 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 We love Trump!
Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now.
Look for friends of the stream. Let's see if we can see that sushi guy or Fuentes or Baked Alaska guys.
Get back, ladies! Get back, ladies!
Priority. We just had protest. Be circle, breach the line. We need backup.
Madam Speaker, the Vice President, and the United States Senate.
give riot warnings as soon as the outloud is here. We're going to give riot warnings. We're going to try to get compliance, but this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
5 to 50 be advised, Capitol Police 1 advised they're trying to breach and get into the Capitol.
I copy.
We're about 5 mics out. We're trying to make our way through all this.
Imagine being here and doing all of this, and then fucking 1 week later, Trump and everybody is calling you Antifa. Jeez.
We have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol to the upper level!
Be advised, they're requesting additional resources on the east side as they've broken into that window and they're trying to kick it in.
Without objection, the chair declares the House in recess pursuant to Clause 12B of Rule 1.
Why then open fire on these people? Because you can't really, you can't do that.
Giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. U.S. demands the truth. Bring out facts. Bring out facts. Bring out facts.
We're gonna get too many fucking people. Look at this fucking bandit equipment. We're fucked.
Yeah.
We need an area for the House members. They're all walking over now through the tunnels.
Do you think August Editing made this compilation video for Congress?
We're trying to hold the upper deck. We're trying to hold the upper deck now. We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need court support. We lost the line. All MPDs get back. All MPDs get back up to the upper deck. All MPDs get back to the upper deck. ASAP.
Cruiser 50, be advised that Capitol Police is going to start moving their resources inside. We're going to start the M4 officers first.
Hold on. What is the point of the committee showing this other than to make you feel afraid? Because there are a ton of people in the United States, for instance, probably 80% of my YouTube chat right now, that will constantly go on Twitter and lie to you, saying things like, cops let them in, it was mostly a peaceful protest, a couple of people just managed to get into the side of like the building or whatever. A ton of people that unironically believe that narrative, probably the majority of my YouTube chat, have said similar things on Twitter, because I see there's a lot of conservatives right now. I think it's really good to have a full accounting of from start to finish. This is where things started, this is how they got into the building, this is what it looked like at every moment of this like infiltration or attempted coup d'etat, if you will. I think it's good to have it all so that we can all be working from the same set of realistic facts rather than the delusional stories that conservatives try to say, well, oh, the cops just let a bunch of people in, blah, 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 which is the biggest fucking cope in the world, right? They constantly gravitate between these two positions of the cops let them in, and well, it was all Antifa anyway. Or it was a peaceful protest.
Okay, H208 with 4 members. The door's barricaded. There's people flooded the hallways outside. We have no way out.
Officers still remaining on the house floor, on the third floor, to use the subway themselves. It's time to evacuate so we can secure the members on the other side. Copy.
It's up to us people now, the American people. One more time. Are you ready to do? And whatever it takes, I'll lay my life down if it takes.
Absolutely. That's why we showed up today.
You back up!
Stations into that West Territory for backup.
Pursuant to the order of the committee of tonight, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
The January 6th Select Committee pausing for a brief recess. This is live coverage from the Washington Post. They're letting this moment breathe, the moment when the country watched a timeline of chronological series of events of what happened on January 6th as the Capitol was being attacked, presented by the chair and vice chair, Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney. We anticipate hearing some live testimony yet tonight. Let's go to James Hohmann to talk about what the committee is doing today. James, let's work backwards. We'll talk in a moment about the opening statements, but first let's start where the committee has left off, with those harrowing and horrific images of law enforcement under attack, defending the Capitol, trying to protect one another in some cases from being killed. And the lawlessness of the men and women who were trying to breach and successfully did breach the Capitol. I think we have trouble with James's microphone, so we'll get that ironed out in just a moment. Oh, I think we've got you now, James. Go ahead.
I would add haunting to your description. The videos are really haunting, and they are letting these breathe right now. The clips that we hadn't seen before included surveillance footage of Kevin McCarthy's office. He's the House leader who today was attacking the committee's work. And you saw all of the Republican staffers in Leader McCarthy's office scurrying for their lives. And then, you see the rioters going into Nancy Pelosi's office as they're creepily yelling Nancy and hang Mike Pence. And you see the vitriol aimed directly at the members of law enforcement who are just doing their jobs. It really is remarkable that there was not more bloodshed that day. Only one of the rioters was fatally shot by police inside the Capitol. And when you see those videos and that level of confrontation, it really is just remarkable that there was not more bloodshed.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that police didn't start shooting people as they were breaking into the United States Capitol, frankly. We know that over 140 officers...
You can't, when you're doing like riot control, and I don't know if Matt Tips is here, maybe he can speak to this, because I think he is, I always forget what he does. Is he SWAT outside of Seattle? You can't just start shooting at crowds of people when you've got that few officers, right? Like, what do you have, like 20 officers there that are going to take handguns and start shooting into the crowd? Like, now you've created like an ultimately lethal fucking bloodbath of destruction. Like, shit is going to get fucked. You just can't do that, and it would look bad anyway. You don't want typically like police officers firing on civilians, especially like in the Capitol. It's going to look horrible. It's like this is like a last resort, which is why it's better to redirect crowds and kind of like direct their energy to different places and like stall them and use like gas and shit is better than just we're going to start shooting into crowds of civilians. Always like that's a really bad look for any country. Yeah, that's how you get people like Yanukovych fleeing the country because they realize how fucked they are when they start doing shit like that.
Officers were injured that day. We know that one officer died, as you mentioned, and 4 officers killed themselves in the subsequent weeks and months afterward. Their stories are part of the narrative that we will be hearing over the next weeks from this committee.
Yeah, absolutely. And that word is an interesting one, narrative. I was really struck in the videos that were played of how Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recounted Mark Meadows calling him as this was unfolding what we just saw and saying, we need to change the narrative that the president isn't in control of things. And that really encapsulates what we've seen for the last year and a half, which is a fight by people close to the former president to control the narrative of that day.
Imagine fighting cops, breaking windows, taking cops' batons, bringing bats and bulletproof vests, and saying it was peaceful and not a riot.
The narrative
they hung a noose for Pence.
The reality.
Okay, so we have seen clips of people who have testified before this committee, including Ivanka Trump, James, including Jared Kushner, and others. What stood out to you so far on what we've heard from those excerpts?
The Jared Kushner clip where
Keep hating your life, then,
dismissed all what he called whining of various White House lawyers who were threatening to resign. The fact that Bill Barr, the former Attorney General, used profanity to describe telling Trump that there was nothing to his allegations of fraud. The Mark Meadows, White House Chief of Staff, saying to one of Trump's own campaign lawyers, there's no there as it related to their accounts of fraud. It's important to establish that this isn't something Trump really believed. Trump, we saw them laying out, knew that these allegations were false, but he made them anyway, and that makes it all the more damning. And the fact that the most damning video clips were played as part of the opening statement by Liz Cheney also seemed quite relevant. This is a Republican congresswoman, and she was playing clips of Republican officials talking, not just one or two, but more than a dozen. And so it made it seem like less of a partisan exercise.
Well, the very first tape that we heard tonight came from former Attorney General Bill Barr during the committee chairman Benny Thompson's opening statement.
The incumbent administration stays in power based on its view, unsupported by specific evidence, that there was fraud in the election.
James, what's the significance of hearing that as the very first piece of tape in this opening series of hearings?
It really is essential to establishing that, and it seems clear the committee wants to do this, that Trump broke the law, that Trump knowingly was trying to violate his constitutional oath but also the Electoral Count Act, and having the nation's chief law enforcement officer recount contemporaneously that the president was told that what he was saying was bullshit, to use Barr's word, does support that argument. Not just in the court of public opinion, but as Liz Cheney was saying, in the court of law as well. It shows that Trump had knowledge that what he was saying publicly was false.
And Bill Barr resigned in December. So he resigned December 14th after the election, but far before the attack on the Capitol. Let's go to Rhonda Colvin, who's joining us by phone. She's in the committee room. Rhonda, what is the atmosphere like in there?
Well, I can tell you that video that we just saw from different angles of the riot, the groups coming down, Constitution, trying to get into the Capitol. I can tell you that I think everyone in the room gave it all of their attention. I saw most eyes on the screen. I glanced at the area where audience members are sitting, and there are some members of Congress in there, and one looked visibly upset, and she appeared to be crying. It was really hard to see those scenes. I know personally, for me as someone who was inside the complex that day, to see those scenes, to see how it built over a short period of time, it was very tough to watch. I also kept my eye on the officers who are here. They're sitting in the front row. I could see they were having a little bit of a tough time as well watching that. I mean, you know, for the last year and a half, we've seen the images, we've seen photographs, we think we've seen it all and we felt it all. But when you see it in that type of layout that the committee just showed us, it's hard to watch. It kind of refreshes the moment. And of course, we know that's what the committee set out to do tonight, is remind everyone what that day was like.
We're seeing the witnesses seated at the table. We're going to hear this evening from Caroline Edwards, a Capitol police officer, and Nick Husted, a filmmaker who was embedded with the Proud Boys. You see the chairman there, Benny Thompson. We will go back to this hearing live as soon as he gavels back in. Rhonda Colvin is one of our reporters who is there in the hearing room watching all of this unfold in person. Rhonda, before we let you go, they're really trying to make a seamless effort to take people. Oh, let's go back to the hearing room now. We'll talk to Rhonda later.
Committee will be in order. I want to thank our witnesses for being with us this evening to share their firsthand accounts of that terrible day. I know that some of the witnesses from our first hearing are in the room with us, along with some of the family members, friends, and widows of the officers who lost their lives as a result of the attack. Thank you all for being here for us and the American people. Officer Carolyn Edwards has been with the United States Capitol Police since 2017. On January 6th, Officer Edwards was assigned to the First Responder Unit, which serves as the first line of defense at the Capitol complex. She also served as a member of the Civil Disturbance Unit, a special subset of the uniformed division trained to respond to mass demonstration events. Officer Edwards is a graduate of the University of Georgia and currently is working on a master's degree in intelligence analysis from Johns Hopkins University. Nick Quistad is an acclaimed filmmaker. Credits include documenting stories from war zones in Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. On January 6th, Mr. Quistad was working on a documentary about, quote, why Americans are so divided when Americans have so much in common, end quote. During that day, Mr. Quistad interviewed and documented movements of the people around the Capitol, including the first moments of the violence against the Capitol Police and the chaos that ensued. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Without objection, the witness's statement will be included in the record. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I recognize myself for questioning. As you saw just a few minutes ago, the Proud Boys instigated the first breach of the Capitol just before 1:00 p.m., where rioters pushed over barricades near the Peace Circle at the foot of the Capitol. Our two witnesses tonight were both there at the time of that first breach. Officer Edwards was standing with other officers behind a line of bike racks that marked the perimeter of the Capitol grounds. She bravely tried to prevent an angry crowd from advancing on the Capitol. Unfortunately, she was overrun and knocked unconscious as the crowd advanced on the Capitol. Mr. Quistad was a few yards away from Officer Edwards, taking footage of the Proud Boys as part of his work on a documentary film. Most of his footage has never been shown publicly before we shared it this evening. Officer Edwards, I'd like to start by asking if you could tell us why you believe it's important for you to share your story this evening with the committee and the American public. Please, your microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee for having me here to testify. I was called a lot of things on January 6, 2021 and the days thereafter. I was called Nancy Pelosi's dog, called incompetent, called a hero, and a villain. I was called a traitor to my country, my oath, and my Constitution. In actuality, I was none of those things. I was an American, standing face to face with other Americans, asking myself how many times, many times, how we had gotten here. I had been called names before, but never had my patriotism or duty been called into question. I, who got up every day, no matter how early the hour or how late I got in the night before, to put on my uniform and to protect America's symbol of democracy. I, who spent countless hours in the baking sun and freezing snow to make sure that America's elected officials were able to do their jobs. I, whose literal blood, sweat, and tears were shed that day defending the building that I spent countless holidays and weekends working in. I am the proud granddaughter of a Marine that fought in the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir in the Korean War. I think of my papa often in these days, how he was so young and thrown into a battle he never saw coming, and answered the call at a great personal cost. How he lived the rest of his days with bullets and shrapnel in his legs, but never once complained about his sacrifice. I would like to think that he would be proud of me. Proud of his granddaughter that stood her ground that day and continued fighting, even though she was wounded, like he did many years ago. I am my grandfather's granddaughter, proud to put on a uniform and serve my country. They dared to question my honor. They dared to question my loyalty. And they dared to question my duty. I'm a proud American, and I will gladly sacrifice everything to make sure that the America my grandfather defended is here for many years to come. Thank you.
Officer Edwards, your story and your service is important, and I thank you for being here tonight. Mrs. Quickstead, I'd also like to ask you to introduce yourself. Can you tell us how you found yourself in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021?
Good evening, Chair and Madam Vice Chair. Thank you for the introduction. As stated, in the winter of 2020, I was working on a documentary. As part of that documentary, I filmed several rallies in Washington, D.C. on December the 11th and December the 12th. And I learned there would be a rally on the Mall on January 6th. So my three colleagues and I came down to document the rally. According to the permit of the event, there was going to be a rally at the Ellipse. We arrived at the Mall and observed a large contingent of Proud Boys marching towards the Capitol. We filmed them, and almost immediately I was separated from my colleagues. I documented the crowd turn from protesters to rioters to insurrectionists. I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity. And for anyone who didn't understand how violent that event was, I saw it, I documented it, and I experienced it. I heard incredibly aggressive chanting, and I subsequently shared that footage with the authorities. I'm here today pursuant to a House subpoena. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Quested. The Select Committee has conducted extensive investigative work to understand what led the Proud Boys and other rioters to the Capitol on January 6th. We've obtained substantial evidence showing that the president's December 19th tweet calling his followers to Washington, D.C. on January 6th energized individuals from the Proud Boys and other extremist groups. I'd like to play a brief video highlighting some of this evidence.
My name is Marcus Childress, and I'm an investigative counsel for the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
white
right
like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
After he made this comment, Enrique Terrio, then chairman of the Proud Boys, said on Parler, "Standing by, sir." During our investigation, we learned that this comment during the presidential debate actually led to an increase in membership from the Proud Boys.
Would you say that Proud Boys numbers increased after the stand back, stand by comment?
Exponentially. I'd say triple probably, with the potential for a lot more eventually.
And did you ever sell any stand back and stand by merchandise?
One of the vendors on my page actually beat me to it, but I wish I would have made a stand back, stand by shirt.
On December 19th, President Trump tweeted about the January 6th rally and told attendees, "Be there, we'll be wild." Many of the witnesses that we interviewed were inspired by the president's call and came to DC for January 6th. But the extremists, they took it a step further. They viewed this tweet as a call to arms. A day later, the Department of Justice described how the Proud Boys created a chat called the Ministry of Self-Defense Leadership Chat. In this chat, the Proud Boys established a command structure in anticipation of coming back to DC on January 6th. The Department of Justice describes Mr. Terrio coming into possession of a document called the 1776 Returns, which describes individuals occupying key buildings around the United States Capitol. The Oath Keepers are another group that the committee investigated.
You better get your ass to D.C., folks, this Saturday.
Yeah, if you don't, there'll be no more republic. But we're not going to let that happen. It's not even an if. It's either President Trump is encouraged and bolstered, strengthened to do what he must do, or we wind up in a bloody fight. We all know that. The fight's coming.
The Oath Keepers began planning to block the peaceful transfer of power shortly after the November 3rd election. And according to the Department of Justice, Stuart Rhodes, the Oath Keepers leader, said to his followers that we were not going to get through this without a civil war. In response to the December 19th, 2020 tweet by President Trump, the Oath Keepers focused on January 6th in Washington, D.C. In response to the tweet, one member, the president of the Florida chapter, put on social media, "The president called us to the Capitol. He wants us to make it wild." The goal was for the Oath Keepers to be called to duty so that they could keep the president in power, although President Trump had just lost the election. The committee learned that the Oath Keepers set up quick reaction forces outside of the city in Virginia where they stored arms. The goal of these quick reaction forces was to be on standby just in case President Trump invoked the Insurrection Act.
Did the Oath Keepers ever provide weapons to members? I'm going to decline to answer that and put them in grounds for a due process ground.
In footage obtained by the committee, we learned that on the night of January 5th, Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes met in a parking garage in Washington, D.C.
There's mutual respect there. I think we're fighting the same fight, and I think that's what's important.
The committee learned that the Oath Keepers went into the Capitol through the east doors in two stack formations. The DOJ alleges that one of the stacks went into the Capitol looking for Speaker Pelosi, although they never found her. As the attack was unfolding, Mr. Tarrio took credit. In documents obtained by the Department of Justice, Mr. Tarrio said in an encrypted chat, "Made no mistake, and we did this." Later on that evening, Mr. Tarrio even posted a video which seemed to resemble him in front of the Capitol with a black cape, and the title of the video was Premonition. The evidence developed by the Select Committee and the Department of Justice highlights how each group participated on the attack on the Capitol on January 6th.
In fact, the investigation revealed that it was individuals associated with the Proud Boys who instigated the initial breach of the Peace Circle at 12:53 p.m.
Within 10 minutes, rioters had already filled the Lower West Plaza. By 2 o'clock, rioters had reached the doors on the west and the east plazas. And by 2:13, rioters had actually broken through the Senate wing door and got into the Capitol. A series of breaches followed. At 2:25 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors to the Rotunda. And then right after 2:40 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors near the Ways and Means room. Once the rioters infiltrated the Capitol, they moved through the crypt, the rotunda, the hallways leading to the House chambers, and even inside the Senate chambers.
Individuals associated with two violent extremist groups have been charged with seditious conspiracy in connection with the January 6th attack. One is the Oath Keepers. They are a group of armed anti-government extremists. The other group is the Proud Boys. They promote white supremacist beliefs and have engaged in violence with people they view as their political enemies. Members of both groups have already pled guilty to crimes associated with the January 6th attack. Mr. Quested, as part of the documentary you've been filming, you gained access to the Proud Boys and their leader, Enrique Tarrio. Your crew filmed them in Washington, D.C. on the evening of January 5th and then on January 6th. On January 5th, the night before the attack, you were with the head of the Proud Boys, Mr. Tarrio, in Washington, D.C. What happened?
We picked up Mr. Tarrio from jail. He's been arrested for carrying some magazines, some extra capacity magazines, and he took responsibility for the burning of the Black Lives Matter flag that was stolen from the church on December the 12th. We were attempting to get an interview with Mr. Tarrio. We had no idea of any of the events that were going to subsequently happen. We drove him to pick up his bags from the property department of the police, which is just south of the mall. We picked up his bags and went to get some other bags from the Phoenix Hotel, where we encountered Mr. Stuart Rhodes from the Oath Keepers. By the time I'd gone to park the car, my colleague was saying, who'd got into the car with Mr. Tarrio, that they had moved to a location around the corner, the parking garage of the Hall of Legends, I believe. And so we quickly drove over there. We drove down into the parking garage and filmed the scene of Mr. Tarrio and Mr. Rhodes and certain other individuals in that garage. We then continued to follow Mr. Tarrio. There was some discussion about where he was going to go. He ended up going towards a hotel in Baltimore, and we conducted an interview with him in the hotel room. And then we returned to DC for that night. And what was interesting that night actually was that was the first indication that DC was much more busy than it had been any other time we'd been here, because we couldn't get into the hotels we wanted to, and we ended up at a hotel that, you know, was not as satisfactory as we would have hoped.
Thank you. So what you're saying is you filmed the meeting between Mr. Tarrio and Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes, right?
Indeed.
You couldn't hear what was said, but according to the Justice Department indictment of Mr. Tarrio, a participant referenced the Capitol. Now, on the morning of January 6th, you learned the Proud Boys were gathered near the rally scheduled to take place near the White House. What time did you meet up with the Proud Boys, and what was happening when they met?
We met up with the Proud Boys somewhere around 10:30 a.m. and they were starting to walk down the mall easterly direction towards the Capitol. There was a large contingent, more than I had expected, and I was confused to a certain extent why we were walking away from the president's speech, because that's what I felt we were there to cover.
So at 10:30 a.m., that's early in the day. That's even before President Trump had started speaking. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
So how many Proud Boys would you estimate were marching together to the Capitol?
A couple of hundred, potentially. Yeah, I'd say a couple of hundred Proud Boys were marching towards the Capitol at that point.
At the time, was the area heavily guarded?
No, that was, I remember we walked we walked down the mall, we walked to the right of the reflecting pool, and then north along the road that leads to the Peace Circle. And as we were walking past the Peace Circle, I framed the Proud Boys to the right of my shot with the Capitol behind, and we see one sole police officer at the barriers, which subsequently breached. We then walk up and past a tactical unit preparing, and you see that in the film where the man questions their duty and their honor, and you see maybe a dozen Capitol Police putting on their riot gear.
So how would you describe the atmosphere at that time?
The atmosphere it seemed to be much darker. I make efforts to create a familiarity between myself and my subjects to make them feel comfortable. And the atmosphere was much darker this day than had been in these other days. And there was also a contingent of Proud Boys that I hadn't met before from Arizona who appeared to wear these orange hats. and had orange armbands.
So when the Proud Boys went back down the hill to the Peace Circle, did a larger crowd start together?
Well, no, first of all, we went round to the back and down the steps, and we took some photographs on the east side of the Capitol, and then we went for lunch. We went for tacos.
So, Mr. Questa, you're a journalist, so you are careful to stick to things that you have observed. But what you've told us is highly relevant. Let me highlight a few key facts that you and others have provided the committee. First, there was a large group of Proud Boys present at the Capitol. We know that from multiple sources. You now estimate that there were around 250 to 300 individuals that you've testified. They weren't there for President Trump's speech. We know this because they left that area to march toward the Capitol before the speech began. They walked around the Capitol that morning. I'm concerned this allowed them to see what defenses were in place and where weaknesses might be. And they decided to launch their attack at the Peace Circle, which is the front door of the Capitol complex. It's the first security perimeter that those marching from the ellipse would have to come to as they moved toward the Capitol. The Peace Circle walkway was always where the thousands of angry Trump supporters would arrive after President Trump sent them from the ellipse. The Proud Boys timed their attack to the moments before the start of the joint session in the Capitol, which is also where President Trump directed the angry mob, quote, "We fight like hell," end quote. He told them before sending them down Pennsylvania Avenue, right to where the Proud Boys gathered and where you were filming. Now, a central question is whether the attack on the Capitol was coordinated and planned. What you witnessed is what a coordinated and planned effort would look like. It was the culmination of a months-long effort spearheaded by President Trump. Mr. Questa, thank you for your eyewitness account of the lead up to the breach of the Peace Circle. This brings us to a point in time where you and Officer Edwards were in close proximity. At this point, I reserve the balance of my time pursuant to 5C, Section 8 of House Resolution 503. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Officer Edwards, I want to start by thanking you for your service and thank you for your courage. Thank you for being here this evening. I know that it's not easy to relive what happened for you and for the officers behind you and for the family members of officers in the audience this evening. But it's really important for the country to have a full accounting and understand what happened. I want to start, Officer Edwards, with a short clip that shows the horrible moment when you were injured as the Peace Circle was breached. Officer Edwards, can you describe the crowd that had assembled at the Peace Circle as you and your fellow officers stood behind and guarded the bike racks at the Peace Circle?
Yes, so there were about, I want to say about 5 of us on that line. And there was our bike rack, and then at the bottom of the Pennsylvania Avenue walkway, right by Peace Circle, there was another bike rack. And so the crowd had kind of gathered there. It was the crowd led by Joseph Biggs, And they were mostly in civilian clothes. There were some who had military fatigues on. We could see people with bulletproof vests on, things like that. They didn't seem, extremely cohesive, but they had gathered there in their outfits. But they had gathered there together, and Joseph Biggs started. He had a megaphone, and he started talking about, first it was things kind of relating to Congress, and then the tables started turning once the, what is now the Arizona group is what you said, the crowd with orange hats, they came up chanting F-U-C-K, Antifa, and they joined that group. And once they joined that group, Joseph Biggs' rhetoric turned to the Capitol Police. He started asking us questions like, you didn't miss a paycheck during the pandemic. Mentioning stuff about our pay scale was mentioned. And, started turning the tables on us. And I've worked, I can, conservatively say probably hundreds of civil disturbance events. I know when I'm being turned into a villain, and that's when I turned to my sergeant and I stated the understatement of the century. I said, Sarge, I think we're gonna need a few more people down here. And so after that, I think they started conferring. They went a little silent. They started conferring among each other. I saw the person now identified as Ryan Samsel. He put his arm around Joseph Biggs, and they were talking, and then they started approaching the first barricade. They ripped the first barricade down, and they approached our bike racks. At that time, we started holding on, grabbing the bike racks. There weren't many of us, so I grabbed the middle between two different bike racks. And, I wasn't under any pretense that I could hold it for very long, but I just wanted to, make sure that we could get more people down and get our CDU units time to answer the call. So we started grappling over the bike racks. I felt the bike rack come on top of my head, and I was pushed backwards, and my foot caught the stair behind me, and my chin hit the handrail, and then at that point I had blacked out, but the back of my head clipped the concrete stairs behind me.
And you were knocked unconscious, is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am.
But then when you regained consciousness, even with the injuries, you returned to duty, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. At that time, adrenaline kicked in. I ran towards the West Front, and I tried to hold the line at the Senate steps at the Lower West Terrace. More people kept coming at us. It just seemed like, more and more people started, coming onto the West Front. They started overpowering us. And that was right about when MPD's officers showed up. Their bike officers pushed the crowd back and allowed our CDU units as well as theirs to form that line that you see, that very thin line between us and the protesters or the rioters, at that time. I fell behind that line, and for a while I started decontaminating people who had gotten sprayed and treating people medically who needed it.
And then you were injured again there on the West Terrace. Is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am. So after a while, I got back on the line. It was on the health side of the Lower West Terrace. And I was holding that line for a while. There weren't many of us over there. And Officer Sicknick was behind me for most of the time, for about 30 to 45 minutes that I was down there. We were just, as the best we could, we were just, grappling over bike racks and trying to hold them as quick as possible. All of a sudden, I see movement to the left of me, and I turned, and it was Officer Sicknick with his head in his hands. And he was ghostly pale, which I figured at that point that he had been sprayed, and I was concerned. My, cop alarm bells went off, because if you get sprayed with pepper spray, you're gonna turn red. He turned just about as pale as this sheet of paper. And so I looked back to see what had hit him, what had happened, and that's when I got sprayed in the eyes as well. I was taken to be decontaminated by another officer, but we didn't get the chance because we were then tear gassed.
And we are going to play just a brief clip of that moment that you've just described, Officer Edwards. Officer Edwards, I just want to thank you for being here. And I know, again, how difficult it is. I know the family of Officer Sicknick as well, who's here tonight. One of the things one of the Capitol Police officers said to me recently was to ask me whether or not, as members of Congress, all of us understood that on that day, on January 6th, when we were evacuated from the chamber, were led to a safe, undisclosed location, whether we knew that so many of you had rushed out of the building and into the fight. And I can assure you that we do know that, and that we understand how important your service is. Thank you for your continued work with our committee and the interviews, and thank you very much for both of you for being here this evening. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Edwards, can you give us one memory of that awful day that stands out most vividly in your mind?
I can. That time when I talked about falling behind MPD's line, I remember because I had been kind of shielded away because I was holding those stairs, so I wasn't able to really see what was going on over here. When I fell behind that line and I can just remember my breath catching in my throat, because what I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I'd seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, they had I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood. You know, I was catching people as they fell. It was carnage. It was chaos. I can't even describe what I saw. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, I would find myself in the middle of a battle. You know, I'm trained to detain, you know, a couple of subjects and handle a crowd, but I'm not combat trained. And that day, it was just hours of hand-to-hand combat, hours of dealing with things that were way beyond any law enforcement officer has ever trained for. And I just remember that moment of stepping behind the line and just seeing the absolute war zone that the West Front had become.
Let me thank you for your service and obviously your bravery that you have told the world about tonight. It's unfortunate that you had to defend the Capitol from fellow Americans. None of us would ever think that that would have to happen, but it did. So let me thank our witnesses for joining us tonight and sharing their experiences with America. Throughout my chairmanship of this committee, I've continuously vowed that this committee will ensure a comprehensive account of the heroic acts on January 6th, and that we will follow the facts wherever they lead. Your testimony is an essential part of that record and helps us do our job. Mr. Quested, thank you for sharing your footage and your account of the day's events with us. The images you recorded and have shared with the committee do a better job than any of our words in reinforcing the violence of January 6th. We hope that the power of your footage helped encourage all Americans to consider how citizens with so much in common could viciously brawl at the seat of their democratic government. Officer Edwards, thank you for your brave service, as I indicated, on January 6th, and all you did to protect us, and most importantly, our democracy. If you and your fellow officers hadn't held the line against those violent insurrectionists, we can only imagine the disaster that would have ensued. Your heroism in the face of danger is admirable, and your will to continue to protect and serve despite your serious injuries should be an inspiration to all of us. We wish you a continued recovery and look forward to seeing you back in uniform sometime soon. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for tonight's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objections, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. The witnesses have just told us what they heard the rioters saying while they stormed the Capitol on that day. Now we're going to hear it from the rioters themselves. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation.
What really made me want to come was the fact that, you know, I had supported Trump all that time. I did believe, you know, that the election was being stolen, and Trump asked us to come.
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, if this is the only thing he's going to ask of me, I'll do it.
We're going to walk down
to the Capitol.
Did you recall President Trump mentioning going to the Capitol during his speech?
Oh, yeah. So that's one of my disappointments. He said he was going to go with us, that he was going to be there.
I know why I was there, and that's because he called me there, and he laid out what is happening in our government. He laid it out.
But I remember Donald Trump telling people to be there, right? I mean, to support.
You mentioned that the president asked you. Do you remember a specific message?
Basically, yeah, he asked for us to come to D.C., that big things are going to happen.
What got me interested, he said, I have something very important to say on January 6th or something like that. Is what got me interested to be there.
You know, Trump has only asked me for two things. He asked me for my vote, and he asked me to come on January 6th.
When the committee reconvenes next week, we're going to examine the lies that convinced those men and others to storm the Capitol, to try to stop the transfer of power. We're going to take a close look at the first part of Trump's attack on the rule of law, when he hit the fuse that ultimately resulted in the violence of January 6th. Without objection, and with that, the committee stands adjourned.
With the bang of the gavel, the chairman, Benny Thompson, has ended this first public hearing of this month of the Select Committee. Their next public hearing, as you heard, is Monday morning. Testimony tonight from a Capitol police officer injured defending the Capitol grounds and a filmmaker who documented the extremist group, the Proud Boys. Committee members are building their case that the January 6th attack on the Capitol was coordinated and that former President Donald Trump fomented the riot and then did nothing to stop it. You see there committee members, not just the chair and the vice chair, but the other 7 members. This committee is comprised of 2 Republicans, 7 Democrats. This is live coverage from the Washington Post. We will be back on Monday morning. We'll be on air starting at 9:30 a.m., so please join us then. James Hohmann, I want to talk about what we heard tonight. It was such compelling and personal testimony from Officer Edwards as she recalled what happened, and we saw that footage and heard her relay her experience. You see her just topple to the ground, pushed over with that bike rack, and then she got back up and kept defending the Capitol. She talked a lot about Officer Sicknick, and what everyone in that room knows, and hopefully our audience does too, is that Officer Sicknick later died, James.
Yeah, she recalled seeing this pale look that didn't look right, and you know, after she hit her head and was knocked unconscious and came back, she described slipping in people's blood as she was trying to hold the line, and saying there at the end that I'm not combat trained. That day was just hours of hand-to-hand combat. I think we saw why Fox News didn't carry that hearing live. Just damning testimony, especially there with that video at the end with all those members of the crowd saying that they were there because Donald Trump told them to come.
Committee members are talking right now to officers who were injured that day, officers who have testified before this committee last year, who we've heard them speak about everything from being crushed indoors and by attackers to being called racial slurs, as Officer Dunn was right there, to being pepper sprayed in the face, having their masks ripped off of them. James, why revisit this tonight, right? Because they have already taken testimony from these officers publicly.
The frosted glass of memory is a weird thing, Libby, and you watch those deposition interview clips, and those are multi-hour interviews that have been boiled down to shortish sound bites, but they still, even though the quotes are pretty gripping, they're low energy. You're seeing Bill Barr, and Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump. When you contrast that, when you contrast what Trump was tweeting or what was going on in the White House with what was actually happening in the Capitol, it just makes it so much harder to present this as some political charade or to present this as a kind of a victimless crime, because there were real people who, if they hadn't have done their jobs that day, the Capitol would have fallen and the electoral votes might not have been counted.
Let's talk about what the committee is trying to do in terms of building a case, James, and presenting it to the American public. You know, we heard at the end some testimony from people who are either, charged with overrunning the Capitol and actions they did there, or have already been convicted or have pled guilty to it. But what they're trying to do, it seems, is tie their decision-making process to what they heard from President Donald Trump.
There was a video that, as part of that video, I thought one of the more strong moments was when they showed the screen grab of Trump's tweet on the screen, but then you heard a guy on a bullhorn reading the tweet while they were at the Capitol yelling, people were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and he was, this man was reading Trump's tweet attacking Pence on a bullhorn. It really does link the two, and it really shows that this crowd was summoned by Trump, but then really amped up by rhetoric.
Rhonda Colvin joins us now. Rhonda, you were in that hearing room. I want you to paint a picture for us of what it felt like as some of this footage was being shown, but also as you heard the testimony, especially from the Capitol Police officer.
You know, all eyes were on these videos. All eyes were on the witnesses as they gave their testimony. It really was an audience in there that really wanted to know answers. You can sense that from the people who were sitting behind me in sort of a public viewing area. You sensed it from some of the family members of those lost that day. I was actually seated directly behind Officer Sicknick's mother, and I noticed when Carolyn Edwards, the officer who spoke today, gave her story and talked about how he turned white as a sheet when he was sprayed instead of turning red like normal. You can see his mother tear up and dab her eyes. So while the committee seems to be presenting and laying out a case of how involved folks were behind the scenes, how involved the former President Trump was, there's still that emotional aspect of the violence that played out. But everyone in that room was following this. You didn't see anyone bored. This was not like a typical congressional hearing where you might see people kind of drop off or want to leave the room. Everyone paid attention. Everyone was very interested in how, particularly how the Vice Chair Liz Cheney discussed some of the upcoming hearings and how they're going to be broken up into themes, including how Trump, his advisors, the people on his data team and his campaign knew that he lost the election, told him so, but yet he tried to strategize and overturn or possibly overturn the election. So there was a lot of information there. I think what this committee wanted to do tonight was sort of whet the appetite of Americans who are watching and show that they have been building a case. They have been doing all of these interviews, wide-ranging interviews, and you also see how sprawling this investigation is. It goes from within the White House, days and potentially months leading up to this, and then it goes to what was happening on the street with the violence. So there's so much there. It almost makes you wonder how it's all going to be condensed in these follow-up hearings that we're going to see in the next few weeks. But of course, the committee did say that this is an ongoing investigation. It may not stop in June with this series of hearings. It may continue to go on as they see fit.
Yeah, James, let's talk about what we can expect next week, right? We know so far there are hearings scheduled for Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week, and we do have a better sense now of what they may look like and tackle.
Yeah, Liz Cheney in her speech sort of previewed what she called a 7-part conspiracy, and it essentially seems like that's the organizational structure. They're going to go through 7 different ways that they can establish what Liz Cheney called illegality by the president. And that was really one of the striking takeaways for me, Libby, because it felt like the target audience there, as much as public opinion, was Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. This committee is racing against time. The widespread expectation is that Democrats are going to lose control of the House in November, and the committee will then dissolve, basically, will lose its subpoena power. when Republicans take over. And so they're trying to get out everything they can before the end of the year. But then the ball really will be in the Attorney General's and the Justice Department's court. And it felt like Liz Cheney was essentially laying the groundwork to argue that Trump himself broke the law and should be charged for crimes related to the run-up to January 6th and its aftermath.
So, James, there's the question of Trump making decisions that were illegal, or Trump making decisions that were unpresidential. And then there's a whole big area in between of where his prerogative lies as the commander-in-chief to make some basic decisions.
Yes, and so that's the tension, and a lot of it has seemed like, well, this is a political issue, but there's sort of your constitutional oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And we heard Benny Thompson talking in his opening statement about the origins of that being the Civil War and the rebellion of the southern states. And then there are laws on the books. One of the conversations on Capitol Hill recently has been about, they talk about loopholes that Trump took advantage of, and that's why they're trying to reform the Electoral Count Act of 1876. But the argument we heard from Liz Cheney tonight was no. It wasn't that Trump was taking advantage of loopholes. It's that Trump's own lawyers knew what they were saying in court wasn't true. They knew there was no merit to their arguments, that they weren't going to succeed in court. Trump knew he had lost the election, and they were making arguments that they didn't see as meritorious for the purpose of trying to thwart the counting of votes and obstruct Congress from doing its constitutional duty. So that was sort of striking, because they weren't talking about, oh, we need to fix this law so that there can't be these misunderstandings. They were saying, no, the laws on the books Trump broke. That was I was surprised by how hard she leaned into that, especially because it does seem like that is going to be a consistent theme in the upcoming hearings.
James, you're talking about what happened leading up to January 6th. We also heard from Vice Chair Cheney about what happened that day and the inaction. She played two moments from the testimony of Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Mark Milley that I want to go back and revisit. He was contrasting the conversations he had with then Vice President Pence and President Trump. Let's watch.
President Trump gave no order to deploy the National Guard that day, and he made no effort to work with the Department of Justice to coordinate and deploy law enforcement assets. But Vice President Pence did each of those things. For example, here is what General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified to this committee.
There were 2 or 3 calls with Vice President Pence. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous order. There was no question about that. And I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere, but he was very animated, very direct, very firm, and to Secretary Milley. Get the military down here, get the Guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
By contrast, here is General Milley's description of his conversation with staff, Mark Meadows, on January 6th.
He said, we have to kill the narrative that the Vice President is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that that the President is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or what's that thing. I immediately interpret that as politics, politics, politics. Red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly.
Testimony from earlier tonight. Rhonda Colvin, as I set that up, I misspoke and said that Milley was recounting a conversation he had with Donald Trump. Of course, it was with Mark Meadows. But what is the connection there? What is the importance of how Mark Meadows is characterizing that moment and what he's trying to accomplish as this riot is happening at the Capitol?
Well, it seems to show that there was this scramble to protect image, perhaps, to kind of make sure that this was would be favorable, or they could design it in a way that would be favorable to them. As Millie said, it was politics, 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 and he thought that was a red flag. They were very concerned, it appeared, or at least some in the White House may have been concerned about the image of the insurrection and how that would affect them versus stopping what happened, which is what Millie is saying Pence was doing, was asking for some help. Do all you can. So that kind of fills out what many people have probably been suspicious of since the riot, wondering how involved the president and his team were in stopping it versus how we know Pence was reacting. So I think a lot of what we might find out in the coming days and weeks is just confirmation on many things that people thought might be occurring, and that's one of them, that we see that divide between Pence and his team, and we do know that the committee said we'll be hearing from those who served as counsel on his team versus the Trump side, which seemed to be caring about the image and how that might affect them.
James Hohmann, you know, we already knew there was this division between the vice president and the president, and we've had more and more reporting about it. But there's still been so many questions about what Donald Trump was actually doing, like the TikTok of what Trump was doing as those hours went by and there was complete inaction from the White House.
Yeah, Liz Cheney said we're going to hear video of more than half a dozen Trump administration officials who were in the West Wing on January 6th talking about Trump's reaction. We didn't see a tape of it tonight, but Cheney said that we're going to see people recounting Trump saying maybe the supporters in the Capitol have the right idea. And as people were saying, hang Mike Pence, Trump kind of suggesting that he would be okay with that. The Post has reported on that before, but it'll be striking to see Trump officials saying that on tape. And it seems like there's going to be a hearing. The fourth hearing is going to be on Trump's efforts to pressure Pence directly. We'll hear from we'll hear from Pence's lawyer. But then Cheney said that in the final two hearings, we're going to see how Trump summoned the mob and then failed to take action as the mob was in the Capitol. And that is where we may see some of that strong tape in that the committee has said is going to be the final hearing, which will also be in prime time. In that same context, I was struck, again, we've seen reports, as Rhonda was saying, about a lot of this, but to have it laid out in this way, that Trump's legal team was working to halt the counting of the electoral votes during the riot from their war room at the Willard Hotel. Not totally new, but the fact that that is also part of the minute-by-minute story is that Trump's own lawyers were still trying to stop the count, to overturn the electors, while Trump was not responding to this active threat on the Capitol. When you put all those pieces together, when you connect those dots, it becomes a much more damning picture for Donald Trump.
Well, the committee played an excerpt of Ivanka Trump, and we also heard an excerpt of testimony from Jared Kushner, his son-in-law and advisor, in which Jared Kushner minimized and downplayed the concerns of White House lawyers and their threats to resign as they watched Trump continue to talk about trying to overturn the election results.
This is a clip of Jared Kushner addressing multiple threats by White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his team of lawyers to resign in the weeks before January 6th. Jared, are you aware of instances where Pat Cipollone threatened to resign?
I kind of, like I said, my interest at that time was on trying to get as many pardons done. And I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, oh, we're going to resign. We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens. So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
James Hohmann, what's your reaction to that?
That was one of the really most striking clips because it was new. One, it confirms that lots of White House lawyers were threatening to resign. They knew there was a problem before January 6th. They knew the president was doing things that they considered unethical, unconstitutional, potentially illegal, that they were telling him those things were illegal. And then you have his son-in-law, the president's son-in-law, senior White House advisor, being so dismissive about all these lawyers threatening to resign calling it whining, it was startling to see him say that, because it does capture the state of mind in Trump's most inner circle.
Yeah, Rhonda Colvin, what is your interpretation of the use of Ivanka Trump, of Jared Kushner, and seeing these sort of intimate insiders commenting and weighing in here during these proceedings?
Well, since we may not see the full tape of both of those depositions or others, also Don Jr. Testified, or did an interview rather, voluntarily with this committee. Rudy Giuliani, I think, had one of the longest closed-door sessions. I think it went upward of 7 hours with this committee. So there are people who were very close to Trump in his inner circle, knew perhaps the plans before January 6th, and also knew what he was thinking that day, who have worked with the committee, from what we can see, at least discussed with them. But what it seems to show us is that at least some of these family members want to tell what they know, but at what level, since we aren't able to see the entire interview that they had with the Trump children or any of the close associates. It's hard to say what might have happened or what was said or how they conducted it. But it does seem that some wanted to share what they knew and when they knew it. It was striking to me that Ivanka Trump said how much she looked up to William Barr and trusted his assessment about the election.
So, Rhonda, we will see you here on Monday. What will you be anticipating for next week?
Well, one thing, just from watching this committee for the last year in some of their business meetings, they usually include something that we didn't know. And of course, there were a few moments tonight where we learned some things that were new, or they filled in some puzzle pieces that were missing. But I expect more of that. I expect more of that on Monday. I expect more of it on Wednesday. This committee seems to be strategically dropping certain elements of their findings. And then, of course, it should culminate by the end of the month with their final hearing. So I'll just be listening for these new facts and what they're going to roll out. I know from watching them over the last year that they also split up and serve different speaking roles in the committee hearings. So we'll likely hear from other members of this panel on Monday as well as Wednesday.
James Hohmann, a really tough night tonight for the officers who survived the January 6th attack, and for the widows and parents of men who died that day or in the weeks afterwards because they committed suicide. I want you to contrast that with how Republicans in the House are sort of spinning and talking about this hearing already.
Yeah, it's really striking. The official Twitter account for the House Republican Judiciary Committee tweeted, "Nothing new here." They tweeted a picture of rioting in Atlanta during the summer of 2020 and said, "Why isn't Congress talking about this?" Kevin McCarthy earlier this afternoon or evening walked back his comment that Trump bears responsibility for what happened on January 6th, saying, quote, "Every American bears responsibility for what happened on January 6th." So you have this full-scale effort to play down these revelations, and I do think that that's adding insult to injury for these widows and for their families. Clearly, the committee has been doing lots and lots of work behind the scenes, and we're starting to see the fruits of their labor. There were a lot of criticisms of this committee last year for moving too slow. This series of hearings that we're about to watch together has been drawing lots of comparisons to Watergate and the Watergate summer of 1974. Those unspooled much more slowly. There weren't videotaped depositions. There were each of these witnesses being called and testifying for hours on live television. And here, there's a much clearer story arc that we're going to see play out in a pretty compressed timeline during the month of June. And I expect that we will see full transcripts of the depositions. But what I'm interested to see in the coming days is how some of these people who are featured in these deposition clips respond. Are they going to forcefully push back? Or is Trump going to push them to respond? Are they going to say they were taken out of context? That is going to be one of the interesting storylines coming out of tonight.
Well, James, Rhonda, and all of our colleagues in the Washington Post newsroom, thank you so much. James and Rhonda and I will be with you, our audience, throughout the coming weeks. Thank you for watching this moment in news and history with the newsroom of the Washington Post. We will be back Monday morning. We start 9:30 a.m. on Monday to cover the second of these June hearings, and we will be airing all of these uninterrupted and live. So until then, follow all the latest reporting on our website and our apps. I'm Libby Casey, and I'll see you Monday. Have a good night.
Sometimes you have to see to believe.
enemy has been slain. Your team has destroyed a turret.